I don't know much about football. Either one, but I'm talking about the America one. I understand the basic rules. I know what a touchdown is, and the shape of the ball, and I even get the basic strategies of rushing versus passing. But I'm not a fan, as in, I watch the Super Bowl every other year or so and have fun, but I don't paint my face or know the players' names. Imagine if I set up a social media presence called Football Critic and posted a question with an image like this that said, "Dear footballers, what is preventing you from playing like this?" It would be a silly question that my football fan friends would rightfully be annoyed by, and probably respond with ridicule at the way the question revealed my utter ignorance in the area that I had suddenly chose to begin critiquing. If I was lucky, the most gracious of the bunch would meet me by the nachos and help me understand the history of the sport and why pads were implemented, and maybe even inform me of the ongoing dialogue about the necessity of pads. Why am I talking about football, though? Well, on July 9th, the Twitter account Culture Critic posted a photo of Paul Troger's 1733 painting on the ceiling of the Altenburg Abbey in Austria with the question, "Dear artists, what is preventing you from painting like this?" This question is in the same vein as similar questions posed by conservatives as they look at today's artworks. Questions like, why is today's art ugly? Why can't artists just make pretty paintings? Why aren't artists making cathedrals instead of monuments to themselves? I take issue with these questions, similarly to how my fictitious football fan friends would take issue with the fake question I mentioned before. My goal is to respond in two ways as well. The first video, this one, will focus on the implicit condemnation underlying the question and the actual ignorance of Culture Critic. The second will address the blindness that most conservatives have as they look at only the art they are frustrated by, instead of looking for art they might actually like. It will hopefully be a more gracious, directing Culture Critic towards artworks that are similar to Troger's, but in a contemporary manner. So, let's start with my first response. Why do I take issue with this question, and how does it harbor an implicit condemnation? Most of those artists who are being dearly questioned probably find themselves on the political left to some degree, and so they simply ignore it with an air of intellectual superiority. In the same manner, most football fans would ignore my hypothetical questioning. But I can't seem to ignore this one because somehow Culture Critic has amassed a very large audience, and so I feel I must try to engage in good faith, but ask pardon if I cannot hold back from expressing actual offense. My issue begins with the fact that the question is most likely not asked in good faith. It is a condemnation of the values and practices of the artists who are embedded in the culture we have today. The question implies that artists are wrong to make artwork that speaks to their time, just like how my hypothetical question would imply that football players were foolish to be wearing bulky pads instead of the far more free pads of the early days of the sport. Let me unpack this by first giving Culture Critic the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps I'm wrong to think the question is not asked in good faith. So, is it wrong to point out the narcissism latent in our contemporary culture? No. Is it wrong to point out the ugliness and lack of harmony in the artworks made today? No. Is it wrong to condemn acts of excess and gross celebrations of banal and profane activity? No. None of these things are inherently wrong. It is not wrong to condemn evil as evil. It is wrong to call evil good, just as it is wrong to call good evil. Certainly many artists today are calling good evil or evil good. But that seems to be part and parcel of the times. Artists are not alone in doing this. We live in a world that has fallen under the spell of the three witches that cursed Macbeth. What is foul is fair, and what is fair is foul. So what are we to do when we see ugly art? It does not take much intellect or moral judgment to castigate and critique our culture and the art it produces. A wise man once instructed folks to judge things by their fruits. When we look at the strange artwork that has been produced since the turn of the 20th century, it's easy to cringe. Much of it is strange, odd, ugly, and off balance. But what are the fruits of such artworks? And can we judge wisely instead of simply on the merit of how the artwork looks? After all, some delicious fruits are rather ugly. So how do you judge this? Most often, we look at an ugly painting and we judge our response to be the fruit of the artwork. This is Picasso's Guernica. It is ugly. It makes me feel gross. It makes me want to look away and think of far more sacred things. I want to gaze upon a Baroque cathedral ceiling where colors of glory hang above me, depicting the lightest and most glorious heaven. All the while this painting transforms the reality of that ceiling. It is wood, stone, and plaster vaulted upwards, held in place by gravity. Yet I feel light, like I can fly, like I will be pulled up into the beautiful heavens and into those clouds. The reaction, the effect, and the affect on me is part of that fruit. Are these the fruits that we should use to judge? Are these the fruit that justify the initial question? Ignoring the economic means needed to construct such an aesthetic experience, why wouldn't an artist want to create such a glorious experience instead of an artwork that literally repulses its audience? Can there be a good reason to do so? If you cannot imagine why an audience might need to be repulsed, then you are no student of history. Specifically, we can look at the turn of the 20th century, the age of progress. Imagine the White City freshly constructed on the shores of Lake Michigan in glorious Chicago in 1893. It was a testament to the progress started in Europe, which has now made its way to the New World. It was figuratively a city on a hill. It was a glorious sight. It attracted people as pilgrims to the industrialized cathedrals that would be the new city in the coming new century. But it was a lie. All art lies some of the time. The glorious cathedral ceiling, that one that pulls you up to the heavens, it didn't always necessarily have that effect. Imagine you're a poor peasant around when that church was completed. You walk into it, and you see the image that culture critic glorifies. The vaults of heaven above in glory and God as judge, while there you are, covered in mud and warts. Was it as transcendent as we perceive it today, or was it possibly seen as opulent and oppressive by denying the actual poverty of its audience? Martin Luther certainly would have had a few questions about it. Something more like, "Dear artists and clergy, why would you paint like this when the peasants are starving and oppressed by the church?" We tend to forget that artworks change over time. We tend to forget that our perception of an artwork is not always the same as everyone else. We look back at the beauty and forget the complicated human story in which those artworks were made and why our societies have kept them around. Asking why artists don't make work like that today is not a simple question, because artists are doing many different things now. Then again, not to contradict myself, but taken from a different angle, the answer to the original question is simple. Let's look at the economics now. What kind of economy is able to produce an artwork like Troger's? Why aren't artists making art to decorate cathedrals anymore? The Christian church, nearly every denomination, is not making many opulent buildings that demand the degree of decorating that cathedrals and abbeys of the European Renaissance did. Artists cannot afford to do so on their own, and many have no reason to. Artists need to get paid, and so they apply their skills and crafts where there's a willing market to pay them for their skills. Even then, can't they find a way to make something similar? Why is ugliness and repulsion so prevalent, and why is our culture buying it? It's rather simple if you look back at history. The White City, again, it kicks off the 20th century with hope and beauty, and yet in its underbelly is a darkness. Literally, the White City allowed H.H. Holmes to be one of the most prolific serial killers in history. He used the technology of the Industrial Revolution to create a boarding house that was a literal death trap. If the ugly inverse of the cathedral is indulgences, then the inverse of industrial progress is industrial killing. So why did Picasso make Guernica instead of some Last Judgment masterpiece like Troger's? Picasso was not alive in the 18th century, he was alive in the 20th. In the 20th century, humanity saw the promise of the White City, but faced the reality of mechanized warfare a few decades later. Picasso, despite needing to make money, made his masterpiece, Guernica, in response to the massacre of women and children by the Luftwaffe during the Spanish Civil War. Troger looked to St. John's Revelation with hope. Picasso looked to the promises of the White City with disgust. Look at the top of his painting. In the midst of the chaos is an all-seeing eye. But in the middle of that all-seeing eye is not some divine pupil. It's an electric light bulb. The bomb, the power. We can build a White City, and instead we drop bombs on women and children. Here is another obvious reason. Troger's world, the world of pre-industrial Europe, was generally ugly. Picasso's world, the world of industrial Europe and America, was actually quite beautiful. Artists have to make their work visible, And so they need to do that by contrast. Art has to contrast its general milieu in order to be noticed. Otherwise, it just blends into the background. The cathedral contrasted the visual landscape of the medieval village and city. In the 20th century, the gutter contrasts the milieu of the white city. Picasso had to point out the ugly truth of the industrial era. He had to show it as ugly. He warned us of what was to come if we continued down this path. Destruction at the hands of the all-seeing eye of electric power. We are seeing that now in the 21st century. When we take these things into account, it's tough to know what are the right fruits to judge a work of art by. Do you look at the immediate message? Do you look at the cultural impact? Do you look at the monetary value of the artwork and its increase on the secondary market? Personally, there's not one hard and fast rule. Rather, I look for any good fruit at all. I suppose I take the pessimistic stance that it's unlikely for any single human to be able to produce an art object that has a net positive impact. Then I'm happily surprised when I encounter an artwork that does. It just might be an actual miracle. Guernica is ugly. It is good that it is. It would be evil to show the Luftwaffe over the village as heroes. Picasso did not. He did not portray the pain and despair of their torture in a manner that could be glorified easily. He used abstraction, cubism, a fracturing of the human figure. He turned the mother's despair at the dead child into a tongue that is sharpened like a triangle. This painting wakes me up to the suffering around me and how our mechanical world tends towards dehumanization. Luther exposed the ugliness of his day with 95 theses and a hammer and nail. Picasso did it with sharp geometric forms and paint on canvas. This is pretty good fruit if you ask me. Today folks look around and see an ugly world and wonder why the artists aren't making it more beautiful. Well, some of us are trying. Certainly some of us aren't for good reasons, and some of us aren't for bad reasons. More on one of those artists in the second video, by the way. Some artists are trying to wake you up to the ugliness around you like Picasso when he painted Guernica. Some of us can't find a place to hawk our wares, since many folks think beauty is cliché. Maybe if you put your money where your 140 characters are, you could encourage more artists to look for beauty. But I'm getting a little preachy now. I apologize. This is just a surface gloss of what art in the 20th and 21st century is doing and is after. Whether it's economic ignorance or art historical ignorance, I think the question reveals the degree of disconnect between the culture critic and the culture that produced Twitter. I think the question also points the finger at artists who've chased money over the general audience. It is true that artists are not innocent, and it is true that some of them are trying to make the world more ugly, but not all of them. Certainly not all of them. I think there are disconnects and misconceptions on both sides of this question, as in on the side that asks the question and on the side of those whom are queried. Part of this is the misconception that artists make culture. This is one of the arrogant claims of modernism, a claim I think both sides of the question seem to believe. Artists don't make culture. Maybe at some moments in time they do. I shouldn't speak in that much of an extreme. But most often, though, what they are doing is following the movement of culture. They are catching a wave, and occasionally they end up a bit ahead of it, but usually they are just on the leading edge before it collapses on itself. Artists are a bellwether that reveal the amorphous figure of culture through the power of their medium. Artists see culture and then put it on display. Artists often hold a mirror up to the culture. And we do live in a confused and ugly culture. Should you really be that surprised that the reflection you see in the majority of artworks is ugly then? But you should not blame artists for the culture and demand they fix it by making things pretty again. The artist has to be welcomed into a beautiful culture and allowed to explore his or her gifts. Then you will probably receive the beauty you desire. So my question to culture critic is, do you have a beautiful culture that might inspire an artist to marvel at its grandeur? Or is your culture just as corrupt as the culture you criticize?